Thank you. Thank you, Professor Giri, for coming here and sharing your. We are hoping for a good insight from you. First of all, we are talking about Pallavi ma'am, and I was talking about what can be understood when you say conflicts or any other things which is currently going on in the world. So we thought to call somebody who knows better about the issues that going on, who can give us an insight on war or on conflict or some other things. So so that's how we came up contacting Professor Giri from APU. So salute on the word that I have learned from him from Esperanto, which is hi or hello, the greetings. So I'd like to call Pallavi ma'am just to give a short introduction, and we can go ahead with the talk.
I'm actually thrilled to have Giri at A3. He's a teacher I wish I always had, but I didn't. He's my senior colleague at Azim Premji University. And I remember because we were colleagues, I could not attend his classes, but I happened to sit for 1 week in an orientation that Giri was taking. And that obviously had such an impact that when Hassan said, how will we make sense of what is happening in the world today? And I thought, one guy who does it with a lot of fun is Giri. And I have, he can break into Fez's Kavita and can do a lot of poetry and fun stuff in class that by the time the class is finished, you look at the clock and say, oh, it was a 2-hour class. So I hope you will get a glimpse of Giri's magic. I have a formal introduction to read about him, but we used to call him in APU an Esperanto guru. And he'll talk about what Esperanto is a little bit. And also, I just learned because of his formal introduction that he has translated Gandhi's autobiography in Esperanto. So thanks to Hassan, I got to know about this information about Giri. I'm thrilled and thrilled to invite him at A3. I have been bouncing up and down thinking, wow, Giri at A3, that is wonderful. So over to you, Giri. Thank you so much for coming.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you, Pallavi, for that generous introduction. Um, yeah, so the orientation that she's referring to, Pallavi is referring to, was a decade ago. And I happened to do a session on violence. Um, and then when she remembers it even now. So when she got back to me saying, "Can you please do something like that?" It was far too large a topic to think about. So I narrowed it down to the one area of violence that I've been thinking about and writing about and teaching about for the last decade or so: linguistic violence. So I thought I will restrict myself to linguistic violence, and since this is a tree, biocultural diversity, um, and connected to mother tongue based multilingual education. Um, how are we doing this? This is not moving now. Yeah, yeah, thanks. Thank you. So there were previous iterations of this argument that I made in English in at the Global Forum in earlier this year in APU itself, to literary scholars who were looking at me wide-eyed. Why was I talking about all this at Hyderabad? And to computer scientists and engineers at IIIT in the International Institute of Information Technology in Hyderabad. All those were in English, all those presentations, obviously. I mentioned that because there were also a couple of earlier iterations in Esperanto at the virtual Congress, Virtuala Congreso, large, very large gathering of 1,100 participants from 80 countries. The Iran Esperanto Association or Iran Esperanto Congress also. So the diverse audiences, but in all those cases, I was doing a kind of linear presentation. Here at A3, I thought I'd try something else, a different structure, which is to start with the center and sort of spiral out. Um, why? Because I thought, look at this, for example, this list of words, adjectives that can precede the word violence. Huge number of them. I've just listed a few in alphabetical order: agrarian violence, caste violence, class violence, cognitive, domestic, ecological, economical, educational, structural, and urban, it ends with, right? And so no doubt you can add more such words to do with violence. Another thing to note about violence is generally the last bullet point here, last point here, namely there are several interdependencies, right? There's a co-occurrence of violence, of class caste, for example. There's a mutual reinforcement of various kinds of violence. Military and religious is an obvious example, especially in our times. And intersectionality, we know that's also gender and caste are intersectionally violent practices all over the world. So there's just too much to um, um, capture in the word violence. So for the focus of this presentation, I thought I'll talk about linguistic violence, consisting specifically of educational and cognitive violence, which leads to uh, a kind of ecological violence, which I will explain in a moment. And all these are forms embedded in a much larger um, idea of structural violence, systemic violence, that it's not just individual actors who are to blame and who are to be asked questions of and accountability for, but there's a much larger structural, uh, a systemic violence that we seem to have created in our times, which is connected to a range of things, which I will come towards the end, largely to do with worldviews. As I said, I'll start with as a spiral structure, start with the kernel, with the center of my argument, which is this slide, which is a world map with uh, red circles, red dots indicating endangered languages. As you can see, the distribution is not random. If you go to the bottom right, yes, the cursor is one. So Australia, for example, the coastal parts of Australia all around, go up to Papua New Guinea, go through Indonesia, and up through Southeast Asia into Northeast India, and then come down to the Western Ghats, the Biosphere Reserve, and cross the ocean, and Central Africa is rich with or full of endangered languages. Cross the ocean again, and you come to South America, where uh, uh, the western coast is full of endangered languages. Go through Central America, up the western coast of North America, US and Canada, and these are places full of endangered languages. Now, uh, look at this. If on this map of endangered languages, if you put a map of plant diversity, something extraordinary happens. The two correlate. Um, Here's the same red dots, red circles replaced by black dots. Once again, you can see that there is the same distribution that I showed earlier, but the underlying, if you overlay with that with the shades of green, which as the map indicates, are plant diversity indicator, right? From very low diversity to very high diversity, deep green. it, there is a surprising correlation between the two, that the areas of biodiversity and the areas of linguistic diversity are correlated. And in fact, the researchers contend that it's not just a correlation, it's actually a causal relationship. And so they call this not cultural diversity, or linguistic diversity, but biocultural diversity. TerraLingua is one of the research institutes that works on this. You might like to look at the website. And the two they claim, the researchers at TerraLingua claim, are inextricably linked. So in every location, as an obvious point, the local environment supports human life. That's a given. What is surprising is the other way around as well, that the communities in turn manage the environment sustainably through their traditional practices. So quite a surprising result. Um, so let's spiral out a bit from that, since that was the structure I had in mind. What are some of the dimensions of these diversities that we are talking about, the biological and the linguistic? How many species are we talking about? What's happening to them? What about languages? What's happening to them? Um, Last year, the World Wildlife Fund (WWF) came up with this Living Planet report. Here's the cover of the youth edition. Some striking stats. I was surprised to learn that the best estimate we have is of 87 lakh species on planet Earth, right? 8.7 million. This is a 2011 paper by Mora et al. Only 11% of those have been described. Only 11%. Imagine that. There's 89% we don't know anything about. 91% of marine species and 86% of terrestrial species are simply have not been catalogued and named. Very little known about them. So the mainstream, really know very little about the other organisms, or the creatures that we share the planet with, which was for me, a surprising um, um, stat. And in that 11% that we know, there's been, the report says, a catastrophic 73% decline in the average size of monitored wildlife populations over just 50 years. Yeah, 73% decline. Freshwater populations fell by 85%. Terrestrial, 69%. Marine populations, 56%. Crazy numbers, huh? The fastest declines were in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia and Pacific. The less dramatic figures for Europe and Central Asia and North America. The report says this reflects the fact that large-scale impacts on nature were already apparent before 1970 in these regions. So that's why the numbers are not high for those regions. But otherwise, just look at those numbers, 85%. I went back to reading something by the biologist E.O. Wilson, brilliant biologist, entomologist as it happens, as you probably know. Each species, he says, is a masterpiece of evolution, offering a vast source of useful scientific knowledge because it is so thoroughly adapted to the environment in which it lives. He adds that it is notoriously difficult to estimate just what the decline has been, but the words in bold there, species are vanishing at a rate 100 to 1,000, 10 to the power 2 to 10 to the power 3 times faster than before the arrival of Homo sapiens. This is the rate of loss. Yeah, it's incredible, 100 to 1,000 times faster than before. This is from his 1999 book, Consilience. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, please do. Yeah, it's a brilliant synthesis of a lot of understanding. The extinction spasm, he says, that we are now inflicting can be moderated if we choose. This is 1999, remember? It's already 2025. Can be moderated if we choose. Otherwise, the next century will see the closing of the Cenozoic era and a new one, characterized not by new life forms, but by biological impoverishment. And he goes on to add fairly somberly, it might appropriately be called the Eremozoic era, the age of loneliness. Think about that. To turn now to languages, yeah. The largest database we have on languages is one called Ethnologue, 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 which says that there are about 7,164 languages in the world. Now, the largest 20 languages are spoken by 50% of humanity. Largest 20 languages. Here's another graphic to show the same thing. 50% of humanity speaks these 25 languages. As you can see, Chinese, Mandarin, Spanish, English, Hindi, down to Gujarati. That's the top 25 world's languages. And 50% of human population speaks those languages. The other 50% speaks all the other chote chote. So you can imagine chote chote zabane, lots of small languages um, all over the world, right? Um, Harman and Lowe, I think I misspelled it. Oh no, there is HAR. Yeah, Harman and Lowe have done some pioneering work in this distribution of languages. And parallel to the crisis in biological diversity, there is a linguistic crisis in linguistic diversity as well. This ring on the right that you see shows you that only 7%, 6.78%, are institutionalized languages, languages that are part of administration, education, judiciary, um, those kinds of official languages. Yeah. There's another 49%, 48.97, 49%, which are stable, meaning they have intergenerational transmission. There is some degree of stability to those languages. But as much as 44% are endangered. I'll come back to that word and unpack it a bit. But something like 3,170 languages, Ethnologue tells us, are endangered. In India, there's UNESCO lists 190 languages, 192 languages as endangered. As many as 180 of those 192 belong to one language family, the Tibeto-Burman family in the Northeast. Here are some names and numbers. Atong, spoken by 4,600 people. Adi, 150,000 people. Aimol, 6,000 people, that kind of thing. Yeah. Anal and Angami, right? Small languages, lots of small languages. Yeah. Uh, in fact, the linguistic diversity of Arunachal Pradesh is the highest in India, which is a surprising stat, right? I mean, you would have thought maybe Uttar Pradesh, being so large, would have linguistic diversity. No. Um, Arunachal has 90 languages, according to this Atlas of the World's Languages in Danger. The critically endangered languages are in Nicobar, Arunachal, Manipur, Tamil Nadu, and West Bengal. And even these are disputed in the sense that there's data to, or there's good arguments to say that the numbers are actually greater. The the um, the numbers of endangered languages are in fact greater. Yeah, Christopher Mosley's Atlas 2010 nevertheless gives 192 languages, endangered languages for India. I said endangered. Let me just there are several scales to measure language endangerment. Here is the one used by UNESCO, the graphic on the right. The bottommost is safe, not endangered, going up to extinct through vulnerable, definitely endangered, severely and critically endangered. Safe is spoken by all generations. So intergenerational transmission, as you might imagine, is a key indicator, is a key criterion to assess endangerment. So spoken by all generations, intergenerational transmission is uninterrupted. The vulnerable ones, most children speak the language, but it is restricted to certain domains. For example, the home. Outside in the school, in the playground, maybe other languages are being used. Definitely endangered, children no longer learn the language, yeah, as a mother tongue at home, right? The home language has shifted. Such languages are also called moribund, moribund, which are not transmitted to the next generation. Severely endangered, languages spoken only by the grandparents and the older generation. Parents' generation may understand, but do not speak it to the children or among themselves. The cab I just came in was driven by a Adivasi from Jharkhand, who's been in Bangalore for 20, 25 years, I think. Yeah. So his language, Kortha, he says is going. Children no longer learn it. Yeah. They've all shifted to Hindi because the school language is Hindi. Critically endangered, the youngest speakers are grandparents or older. And they speak that even they speak the language only partially, hesitantly. Yeah. Semi-speakers, they're called by some researchers. And extinct is, of course, no known speakers for the last 50 years, right? That's how UNESCO measures scales of degrees of endangerment. So there is a linguistic diversity crisis in just 35 years, compared to the 50 years we were talking about biological diversity. In 35 years, between 1970 and 2005, worldwide linguistic diversity fell by 20%, teralingua again, right? Salabank, in this Attitudes to Endangered Languages, Identities and Policies, 2013, she says that 50% of the world's languages will probably no longer be spoken by the year 2100. Yeah, in 70 years, right? 75 years. And this is a conservative estimate. In 1992, back then, a researcher prognosed the coming century, that is our century, the century of loneliness, if Wilson is to be believed, coming century will see either the death or the doom of 90% of the world's languages. Huge. Only 10% of the languages that we are now speaking are probably going to survive into 2100. Worth thinking about. So, of course, spiraling out a little more, this crisis has been remarked on and some things have been done about it. Civil society organizations, United Nations, there's a range of initiatives trying to address this crisis. So there's an International Mother Language Day in February, 21st of February, for which the organization I work with, the World Esperanto Association, Universala Esperanto Asocio, and our own little club at the Azim Premji University, Dialogue, together collaborated to produce these posters. This is the Hindi poster by the poet, translator, activist Laltu, who's Hyderabad based. Pallavi knows him as well. Yeah. So we produce these posters, and these are some of those posters. And on the left is the top left is the Esperanto version, Cago de la Gepatra Linguo. Then there's an English, there's a Tamil version, and bottom is Telugu and Urdu versions of this. So minor highlighting it, conscientization exercise of saying that there is this crisis of mother tongues. The United Nations declared 2019 as the International Year of Indigenous Languages, right? With this remarkable cover from somewhere in Central America, I think, Guatemala, I think, which its achievements, it says, for that year, facilitating the support of, access to, and promotion of indigenous languages, and strengthening the capacities to learn, use, and transmit their languages to subsequent generations. But the concrete achievements also include trying to secure commitments from member states. All of you who are working in conservation probably know just how difficult it is to secure funding commitments from any state, right? To support, provide access to, and promote indigenous languages, including by offering financial support. So much so that we are actually in the international decade of indigenous languages, 2022 to 2032. We are 3 years into that decade, which UNESCO declared in 2022, right? Building a global community for the preservation, revitalization, and support of indigenous languages worldwide. So you can consider this talk also as part of that effort of supporting and thinking about together about indigenous languages. So lots of good words, lots of good ideas, and the optics are lovely. I mean, look at the picture and so on, right? So 2 diversities and 2 crises. The 2 have different causes. Um, both those causes are made worse, exacerbated by what may be broadly called modernity. The drivers for biodiversity loss are well known to this audience, no doubt. Habitat degradation and loss, overexploitation of resources, invasive species, disease, climate change, and pollution, according to the report that I mentioned. For endangered languages, the Cambridge Handbook of Endangered Languages by Austin and Salabank, 2011, the drivers, they say, are war and genocide, back to today's ideas, natural disasters, overt repression, often in the name of national unity, that we should have a single language, we are a single country, right? Marginalization of various kinds, political, economic, cultural, including educational. So hence the linguistic violence that I was mentioning in the title. But to return to biocultural diversity, uh, the knowledge about that environment of those ecological niches is encoded in these endangered languages in the simple way of commonsensical way of what living things live there, right? How do they flourish, and how should we relate to it, right? All this knowledge is what make we call TEK, right? Traditional ecological knowledge, right? All these is encoded in these small languages, the red dots that you saw in that world map. So it's necessary for humanity generally, right? That these languages should flourish, because this is where this knowledge of how to sustainably coexist with this environment, that's where the knowledge is, right? um, but anyway, but even that, you can argue, it can be argued, is only an instrumental reason, right? Putting aside all the ethical arguments, you can say, at least for that reason, at least for the reason that all this information is encoded in these small languages, at least for that reason, these languages should flourish, right? Not regardless of the ethical arguments. But there are strong educational arguments also why these languages should flourish, right? Children learn best in their mother tongues. I mean, it's a commonsensical idea. This Cambridge Handbook of Childhood Multilingualism gives, by Stavans and Jessner, 2022, gives plenty of evidence about why, uh, plenty of educational arguments about why these languages should flourish. Children learn best. In fact, if the cognitive ability is in the mother tongue is strong, is developed, right? It turns out that it is transferable, that children learn other stuff, other subjects, other ideas, other concepts as well, much better. There's a fair bit of evidence to show that. So both from the perspective of learning effectiveness of subjects like mathematics, history, right? And learning of other languages, yeah, it turns out that the way to other tongues is through the mother tongue, from mother tongue to other tongues, right? We need to ensure that these small languages are flourishing in the educational system because of these educational arguments as well. The package that educationists, researchers have put together um, is called mother tongue based multilingual education. Here is a summary from Skutnap Kangas and Huff, um, called Beyond Good Intentions 2005, Combating Linguistic Genocide in Education, right? Strong words. Yeah. And the package seems to be 6 to 8 years of education, largely in the learner's languages. So mother tongues, home languages, however you want to operationalize those words, right? Other languages as subjects, not as medium of instruction. A crucial distinction to make, right? Bilingual teachers who share the language of the learner, who can switch, who can translate, who can scaffold, support the learning uh, of the learners through explanations in the languages of the learners. And the result, it turns out, is a high level multilingualism, that these are learners who at the end of 8 or 10 years uh, can function equally well talking about social sciences or mathematics or sciences or whatever in both languages. And this works wherever effective bilingual education programs have been implemented. This is exactly the outcome we see, that at the end of 8 or 10 years of education, these children can speak about mm, um, sand dunes about photosynthesis, about fractions, both in Dutch as well as English, both in Swedish as well as English, that they are bilingual, they're high-level bilingualism. So it's not something that has not been tried out. It turns out that it's very much possible, this package, if it works. There are more things to unpack there, but for the moment, this one summary of mother tongue-based multilingual education is a useful thing to share, I think. So MTB MLE, mother tongue-based multilingual education. MTB MLE is turns out to be useful for a variety of reasons. Yeah, not just for cognitive growth, not just for educational efficacy and human rights. We'll come to that in a moment, but also for the self-esteem of those individuals, of those children, right? Children who are whose own languages and whose own cultures are validated in the classroom, in the schooling system, right? And this is an enormously important idea, it turns out, for physical and mental well-being of these children, speaking of children of um, um, indigenous and tribal minority children, linguistic minorities. Revitalizing Endangered Languages by Olko and Salabank, 2021, is a pretty good summary of what kinds of efforts, educational efforts, are on all over the world to revitalize languages, right? Um, Grenoble asks why revitalize, and these are some of the answers. Um, Take a look at this from Teresa McCarthy's 2003, she says, indigenous and other minoritized students, remember, right? They have been minoritized. There is an agency. They're not minorities. They have been minoritized. Um, they have not dropped out. They have been pushed out of the system. This is what researchers say, that there is, please add agency to it. There is a structural, systemic effort which marginalizes them. So these minoritized students experience, she says, the lowest rates of educational attainment, the lowest family incomes, and particularly among indigenous youth, the highest rates of depression and teen suicides. It's tragic. It's several times higher than the general population, the mainstream population. Yeah. So this kind of violence, these are the consequences of that linguistic violence, right? And we see that the effects of that on much larger structures, much larger ideas like democracy or a functioning society, right, are tremendous. These are people who have been thrown out, who've been the system has spit them out, so to speak, right? And it rejected them, right? And we know that these are uh, essential voices for engaging with citizenship. Who is an Indian? Who belongs here? Who is a Kannadiga? Who belongs here, right? Those are vital questions that include those voices which have been marginalized, right? So there is a big um, um, blow to deepening democracy in society, big blow to the idea of fraternity among our constitutional values because of this kind of marginalization. So these are these practical reasons: managing environment sustainably, learning efficiency in school. There are also other arguments, as I mentioned or I referred to earlier, namely human rights, right? The idea of human rights we normally think about as legal rights to life and liberty and profession and so on. But language is part of those human rights, the linguistic human rights. And several international instruments have highlighted that, right? Explicitly and implicitly. That LHR, linguistic human rights, have been acknowledged. Here are some examples of both kinds. Implicitly, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, acknowledges linguistic rights. It does not explicitly mention them. But the 1966 Pact of Civil and Political Rights explicitly mentions those. And of course, the CRC, the Convention on Child Rights, Rights of the Child, 1989, mentions this explicitly. Many of these are summarized in this book, Indigenous Children's Education as Linguistic Genocide. That word again. They spend a considerable time, Skutnap Kangas and Dunbar, in 2010. It's freely downloadable. They spend a considerable amount of time justifying the word genocide as well. In fact, she has, Tove Skutnap Kangas, who's one of my mentors, um, she has a really 800-page tome called Linguistic Genocide in Education. And she spends a considerable amount of time in the first chapter justifying that word, saying that no, it's not an exaggeration. The forcible transfer of children of one group to another group is one of the definitions of genocide. Right? It's not just a matter of massacre, uh, not just that, but there is a long-term genocide. So what happened in Rwanda was genocide, yes. Pol Pot in Cambodia, yes, genocide, yes. Bangladesh, maybe, genocide, yes. Yeah, but longer term, the kind of genocide that United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have perpetrated on indigenous children, the so-called lost generation, they're called, who've been forcibly removed from their families and sent to boarding schools hundreds of miles away, sometimes 1,000 miles away, to assimilate, to become Americans, to become Canadians, to become Australians and New Zealanders. Right? That too is genocide. CRC, the Child Rights Convention, um, Article 30 says, in those states in which ethnic, religious, or linguistic minorities or persons of indigenous origins exist, a child belonging to such a minority or who is indigenous shall not be denied the right in community with other members of his or her group to enjoy his or her own culture, to profess and practice his or her own religion, and to use his or her own language, right? Um, so we are a signatory, for example, India is a signatory of the CRC. Two countries did not sign the CRC when it was proposed in 1989. Somalia and the United States, right? Thereafter, they have signed. Somalia has signed. United States is still not, still dithering, right? For other reasons. Yeah, we can go into that later. So the links between linguistic violence and biocultural diversity also tell us something about the vastly different worldviews that exist between the mainstream and these marginalized groups, right? Ganesh Devi, in this book, The Language Loss of the Indigenous, edited 2016, has a very interesting take on this. He says his example is that if there is an indigenous community whose belief system is that human destiny is to belong to the earth and not to offend the earth by claiming that it belongs to us. Yeah. What possible survival, how can that worldview survive in a mainstream worldview whose political imagination is that the earth is there for our needs. We can exploit it as much as we want, right? So Devi says there is no chance that such a worldview, such a language will survive. The people who belong to that language have this worldview as associated with that language. They will necessarily have to step away from that language and move to some mainstream language because the worldview is simply not available as a worldwide, as a mainstream view. So their language cannot be preserved, he says, in a political imagination which exploits the earth's resources in the name of development. Here's the Orao poet, Jacinta Querqueta, who writes, they do not tolerate trees because their roots ask for land. वो पेड़ों को बर्दाश्त नहीं करते क्योंकि उनकी जड़ें जमीन मांगती हैं. Very vastly different worldview. In the abstract that I had circulated for this talk, there was this line which is from attributed to Ray Gwynne Smith, quoted by Anzaldúa in her book Borderlands. Who is to say, Smith asks, who is to say that robbing a people of its language is less violent than war? Right? Skutnap Kangas, in a joint paper we wrote many years ago, speaks of it as a silent ethnocide, a 500-year-long silent ethnocide against indigenous peoples. Who is to say that robbing a people of its language is less violent than war? And that book, in the same chapter, later on quotes the poet Klepfish. And our tongues have become dry. The wilderness has dried out our tongues. And we have forgotten speech. Those blank spaces after dry and tongues are there in the original, asking you to pause and experience that dryness. I'll end with one more poem. This one by an American poet whom I didn't know very much about, called Jeffrey McDaniel, called The Quiet World. In an effort to get people to look into each other's eyes more, in an effort to get people to look into each other's eyes more, and also to appease the mutes, the government has decided to allot each person exactly 167 words per day. When the phone rings, I put it to my ear without saying hello. In the restaurant, I point at chicken noodle soup. I'm adjusting well to the new way. Late at night, I call my long-distance lover, proudly say, I only used 59 today. I saved the rest for you. When she doesn't respond, I know she's used up all her words. So I slowly whisper, I love you, 32 and a third times. After that, we just sit on the line and listen to each other breathe. Thank you. Questions, comments? I haven't. Thank you. Questions, comments?
Thank you, sir. Anybody wants to ask any question, comments, or people online also, they can ask. We are open.
How many are there online? Five. Yes, sir.
Like in species taxonomy, people will say like what is considered a different species. Is there any such number for what is considered, why Tamil and Kannada is different?
Yeah.
Is there a percentage different that calls it, like qualifies it as a new language or a different language? Is there anything, or is it arbitrary? Because if that's the case, then how do we know how many languages we lost? Maybe just because we don't know what to define a language, then how do we know what is lost and what is gained?
Yeah. So that's the perennial, good question, by the way, huh? But it's a perennial gray area of knowing where a language stops and a dialect begins. Tove Skutnap Kangas, whom I mentioned, has an amusing anecdote about Denmark, where she lived at that time. She says um, in Denmark, there are about 5 million pigs, and the government of Denmark knows exactly the age, the weight, the health of every pig, right? Because bacon is an important economic commodity. There is no idea that the government of Denmark has about languages other than Danish and English. So there is a methodological problem of separating language and dialect. And there is also a resource problem or resource constraint of simply not considering it important enough. So we actually don't know very much. We are going by estimates. Um, Another way to think about it, for example, is that there is no known human speech community which does not have deaf people. And the deaf have a language of their own. So in fact, that 7,000 whatever number that I mentioned may well be much higher with undocumented deaf languages, which may be home signing, which may be developed sign languages. We don't know very much. So there is quite a large uncertainty about how many languages we are talking about. But this 7,000 seems to be a base figure which is reliable. Beyond that, it may well be very many more. The census of India is a good example. The 2011 census lists, asks, the census enumerator comes home and says, okay, what languages do you speak? What language? They're expected to ask each member of the family, each adult member of the family, what languages they know, right? It doesn't quite happen that way, never mind. But the point is that the 2011 census yielded 19,000 something, 19,700 something raw language names. They call raw data. And these were taken back to the Registrar General's office in the census department and rationalized to 1,600 or so, which were finally boiled down. They don't call it boiled down. That doesn't sound scientific. Rationalized. Yeah, grouped into 120 or so mother tongues, 122 mother tongues. So you can imagine where is 19,000 and what has happened to make it 122. So under the word Hindi, for example, under the language rubric Hindi, for example, in the Census of India, there are 56 or so mother tongues listed. 56. And one of them, for example, is Bhojpuri, which is spoken by 51 million, 5.1 crore people. How we can just put it under Hindi is a mystery, right? So there is a lot of uncertainty here, to briefly do. Quite right. Yes, sir. Yeah, it's probably needed for the
Okay.
online.
So in the beginning, you talked about the causality relation between plant diversity and the languages coming up throughout the world. So, what exactly, why is that happen? Like how people perceive plants and come up with linguistic?
Yeah. So the standard explanation for speciation is biogeographic separation, right? One of the explanations that these are separated. There are people living in different valleys or species of this butterfly population got uh, swept by wind over the ridge into the next valley. And over a few generations, reproductively, they became isolated groups. Then, right? So they became two different species. Pretty much a similar separation and speciation seems to be happening with languages. That this group moves out from a collective group and goes and settles into the next valley and no longer has even trade relations or marital relations with the parent population, with the group population. Over a century, their speech forms diverge. So much so that any outsider would say that there's a mutually relatively incomprehensible. Intercomprehensibility is low. So they become separate languages. So seems to be a parallel process of biogeographic separation, both for biological speciation as well as language formation. Does that make sense?
So, so when we say the biogeographically, it leads to more complexities or distinction of a language. So there are this multiple words for snow in the northern region of India. So is that, can we definitely say that because of that complexity of that landscape, such different words were required to describe snow so they can better articulate how the snow is and then, let's say, plan their livelihoods?
Yeah, but that's not related to biogeographic separation. That's simply the fact that that particular ecological or landscape, that particular geography needs multiple professional words to describe, right? You can do the same kind of exercise with uh, terms for various kinds of cooking in South India, right? What kinds of, or same kind of exercise with professional diversity of words, right? So it's simply a need for that. So there are reindeer farmers in the tundra in Siberia, for example, uh, who have an extraordinarily rich vocabulary to describe various kinds of reindeer. So there is a single word to describe a certain 3-year-old uncastrated male reindeer. There's a single word for that. We need to unpack it like this. But they need those words for their purposes. Similarly, the words for various kinds of camel in Arabic are pretty diverse. So those are examples of the geography needing those words. So it's not surprising that there is such diversity there. 1 minute, sir. Please use the mic. Yeah.
Before going to my question,
Yes, sir.
can you explain a little more about Esperanto and get that concept?
Certainly. Esperanto was designed as an international link language 140, nearly 140 years ago, in 1887, as a language that was easy to learn. First of all, that was the first USP, that it is easy to learn. And second, that it's not the cultural property of any group. So those two conditions, the man who designed it, man called Zamenhof, Z-A-M-E-N, thank you, a man called Zamenhof, 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 in what is today Poland, which was part of the Russian Empire then, designed this language, saying that it's crazy that we have so many languages which are mutually not comprehensible, and that we need so many years to actually learn it well enough, learn another language well enough to be able to have a serious dialogue with people from other language groups. So he said, why not design a language that is much easier to learn? And that turned out to be Esperanto. I've been using it for about 30 years now, 35 years now. And it's opened up a world of friendships from Japan to Brazil, which I otherwise would simply not have, since those countries don't have higher education in English. They have in Japanese and Brazilian Portuguese. So they don't need English. So I, who thought, for example, that I have the keys to the world in my pocket because I know English, I had to recalibrate many of my language beliefs um, thanks to this. So
How can an Esperanto be a lingua franca to connect with all these indigenous languages?
it's, as I said, the simplest answer is that it's very easy to learn. So the ease of learning means that the number of years, amount of time you need to invest in order to have a good conversation, serious conversation with another Esperanto speaker, right? That is very low. So the entry barrier is very low. For all other languages, all the colonial languages that we know, English, Spanish, French, uh, all these languages are Hindi, far more difficult to learn. So there is no, so all nouns in Esperanto end in A, O, all adjectives end in A. There's a simple tense system. Yeah, but it's complex enough to be able to write poetry in, translate poetry into, right? I've been translating some Faiz into Esperanto. Faiz Ahmad Faiz is a major Urdu poet. There's a lot of world literature available in Esperanto. So it turns out to be a kind of win-win situation. is A, easy to learn, and B, it looks like it can also be flexible enough to accommodate writing and translating of poetry, which is a pretty good indicator of whether the language is a real language or not.
What's the alphabet?
The Latin alphabet was slightly modified. So there are 28 letters. Some letters are missing and some letters have a couple of signs
I'm
on
still
top.
missing the connection between the conservation of the endangered languages and how the Esperanto can help in that.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So one answer is simply that when you get a Koya child, a Paniya child, or a Soliga child who has to learn Kannada or Telugu or Tamil or Malayalam, um, they take a long time to learn because these are difficult languages. And there is research to show that Esperanto is a pretty good bridge language. What I mean by that is that uh, groups of children who have been compared, um, who had who had one group, the control group, had 4 years of French and then wrote a standardized French exam. The intervention group had 1 year of Esperanto and 3 years of French, so 1 year less, right? And that group, which learned 1 year of Esperanto and then 3 years of French, outperformed statistically significantly the group that had 4 years of French. There are a few such studies all over the world indicating that Esperanto is a pretty good bridge language. Because of its regularity, what learners learn is a metalinguistic uh, awareness. They learn how languages work, how past tense is formed, how future tense is formed, how conditionals are formed, and so on. They learn it as as structure, as language as structure. So that metalinguistic awareness, apparently, that is the hypothesis, that the metalinguistic awareness allows them to learn another language faster. So it seems like so for indigenous groups, which have to learn the mainstream language anyway for livelihood reasons, simply, if nothing else, right? It makes sense to have Esperanto as an intervention, educational intervention. It's very hard to convince anybody about this. So typically, it has not been tried uh, on a scale that can be reported that this has worked. But everything seems to indicate that it is a pretty good bridge language.
So, for any individual, any community, or any species, the ultimate aim is the survival and the well-being.
Mm.
The engrossment of the mainstream communities, the mainstream interest, the developmental aspirations of the mainstream communities
Mm.
have taken away most of my resources, the indigenous communities' resources.
Can you please distribute?
And
Thank you.
so the landscape where the indigenous communities live, they are now devoid of having their resources.
Mm.
So they have no other choice other than pick up the language and even part of the culture of the mainstream community and go out of the landscape
Quite right.
to find the livelihood and livelihood.
That's right.
So in between, still most of the communities keep their language within themselves. They practice it. But your interest is the large database preserved in my language. It means the mainstream communities interest is in the rich knowledge in that language. So it is your interest to protect the indigenous language. So in that case, again, you are putting the onus on me to preserve this language instead of you learning my language.
Mm.
So to protect this language, is not better that the mainstream community pick up and learn, document these languages rather than pressurizing the indigenous community, saying that your language is under pressure and you have to conserve it and you have to learn it.
True. There, perfectly true. Um, there is a vast asymmetry between the mainstream and the marginalized linguistic minorities, especially indigenous languages. Um, and even in the best of conditions, for example, the Maori in New Zealand, uh, they have managed to have a semblance of at least or partially get non-Maori New Zealanders to learn some Maori, right? But it's even in that excellent environment of state support and what are called language nests, which is for the revitalization of Maori. Even in that ideal kind of state support situation, the proportion of New Zealanders, non-Maori New Zealanders, who are fluent in Maori is not very large, apparently. So I've heard. Um, so that asymmetry will probably continue because there is vast differences in uh, physical and cultural capital between these two communities. Uh, Given that situation, given that asymmetry, given that inequality, in the discourse of human rights, just as we would say that whether you want your human rights protected or not, the state has the responsibility to protect your human rights, and including linguistic human rights, cultural rights. So in that sense, the onus is on the state. It is not on the community. The other part of what you said is also true, that language revitalization cannot happen unless the community owns it, unless the community says it is worthwhile, it is important enough for our children to learn this. If the community is convinced that my language is useless for livelihood purposes, my language is useless in the mainstream, आज के भारत में, in today's India, this has no place and so on, then for sure, all that the linguists can do is to document that language before it dies out completely, before the last speakers pass away. But if the language has to be revitalized, it is the um, job of the community. It is for the mainstream to, for people like us who have well-being in mind, social well-being in mind, to persuade or try and persuade communities that if you are willing to start a set of classes, we will try and support it somehow. If you were willing to make your language continue as a living organism, we will try and help. We will try and help. So all we can do as means non-tribals, as non-Adivasis, is perhaps to make sure that the circumstances are good, propitious for the flourishing of those languages. But the prognosis seems to be fairly grim, all said and done. So I mean, beyond that, it's hard to say anything. But all the research indicates that it is for the community to own it, to say that it is worth preserving. If the community says it's of no use, then
So
what
the
can I say?
languages today not get helping them in the survival or well-being. That's the reason why they shift to the mainstream languages and mainstream culture. So in that case, it's not the interest of the community to even protect their language.
Yeah,
And we
it's not
cannot
a
deny them.
choice.
We cannot deny them the fruits of all this development and
So you can see
whatever we
what the
enjoy
fruits
today.
of knowledge and development have done to them, no?
Yeah.
So those words, development, fruits of knowledge, are all seeming very, very deceptive. They seem to be benefiting me, the mainstream, the non-tribal mainstream. They don't seem to be benefiting them. The, what it seems to be, in fact, quite the opposite. It seems to be destroying their lifestyles. Their educational outcomes are poor. Their livelihood outcomes are poor. They're among the poorest in the country. And then we say that you have become mainstream. This seems to be an argument that is
That's
not
something to
sustainable.
be debated.
No, it is not debatable. It is the evidence seems to be quite clear. I don't know why you were.
My experience is the other way around. The people who are living inside the forest without any of the facilities are living in a worse condition than people who are rehabilitated outside.
Not much, I would say. It is true that I'm not making a large
The
claim
reason is
here.
nothing but
I'm
about
not saying, for
livelihood
example,
opportunities.
modern health services. I agree. There are arguments to be made, but if you look at the um, life expectancy of at birth of Adivasis who are away from um, PHCs and those who are closer to PHCs, then certainly a difference. There, no doubt about that. Those are, why would I debate that? So I completely agree with that.
Similarly, education.
But the educational outcomes are, on the average, very poor. That is the whole issue.
When we compare them with the mainstream communities who are enjoying this for several generations, they may be lagging behind.
So the argument
But
here.
at the same time,
So the
if they are
argument.
given, if they are given a hand,
So
obviously they can come up. If not during this generation, at least in the generation they'll catch up with you.
So the argument here that I'm making is that giving a hand there, that giving the hand that you mentioned, is perfectly true, but it does not seem to be uh, uh, effective if it is not in the child's language, which is why there is the argument is for mother tongue based multilingual education. No one is denying that the multilingual part is necessary, that the child needs livelihood languages like Hindi and English. No doubt about that. But it seems that the research indicates that it is a much better idea to be able to develop educational materials in the child's languages and taught by bilingual teachers for a sufficiently long period. Yeah, maybe.
That should be for
So yeah,
helping
maybe
the student, making the
said
student.
there's apparently other questions also.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I agree that if that is going to help in making the child more comfortable in education, but it should not be for the conservation of his language on his expenses.
I don't understand what you said. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. So I didn't understand this.
Ananya is asking, can you discuss a bit more about any specific cases where mother language education has been implemented? What were the challenges? For instance, in terms of finding teachers for endangered languages or educational material for technical subjects like maths and science, and how do these things like this apply in case of people who have migrated?
Yeah. Complex question. So for 20 years, a couple of researchers from Odisha, uh, Ajit Mohanty and Minati Panda, have tried to persuade the Odisha government to implement mother tongue based multilingual education. This is a framework that they have developed. Um, and finally, the government of Odisha agreed and currently has 5 years of mother tongue education for Adivasis among 22 languages, I think, if I remember right. Um, and these children, in the first 5 years of their initial 5 years of their education, learn in the mother tongue and then are transitioned to Odia. The biggest, the, the, um, the immediate gains have been that the children stay in school. They understand what is being talked to them because the teacher is speaking in their language, right? Instead of Odia, which they don't understand, which is a foreign language to them. So that's been the immediate large gain there. The biggest criticism is that 5 years is not enough. It looks like five years is not enough to develop cognitive skills which are transferable. So there is a hypothesis called the threshold hypothesis, which says a minimum of 8 years, 6 to 8 years seems to be 8 years seems to be needed before skills that are transferable, such as the ability to compare and contrast, the ability to find counterexamples, the ability to find flaws in an argument, all those higher order thinking skills. It takes about 8 years of education to develop those, and those turn out to be transferable skills. So Ananya is right that the question is that the problem is a complex one, and where it has been implemented for longer periods. In Finland, it has been implemented in various parts of South America. In Bolivia, they have experimented that. Ecuador, they have experimented. Paraguay have. So there are various places where they've experimented with bilingual models, which have a sufficiently long um, um, education in the mother tongue, and that turns out to be a pretty good uh, um, way of developing high-level multilingualism, high-level bilingualism. So indigenous people everywhere are usually either don't get any education in their mother tongue or get only a minimal amount and then are quickly transitioned to what are called early exit models. These early exit models have very limited effectiveness apparently. So it's a big challenge.
I want to ask and bring you back to the reason why we called you.
Want to
Yeah.
continue recording?
No,
or-
it's fine. Yeah, I can. There's a thank you. Ananya says thank
Thank you,
you.
Ananya.
I just want to, as a linguist. Oh yeah.
Please go ahead. ma'am.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for a wonderful session. It was really informative. But this is just out of curiosity, I am asking, is there any relationship between gender and language, especially in conservation? Uh, that's
Why conservation? I didn't understand
like
that.
language protection or some sort of.
Yeah, yeah. The burden of conserving and cultural burden often falls on women. You're right, right?
That's
I
why
mean,
I asked, yeah.
they are the repositories of the honor and the culture of the community. So often they are the ones who the mother tongue remains conserved, whereas the father tongue, because the father often goes out and relocates. Now, for example, the driver who brought me here lives in Bangalore. The wife and family live in a village near Ranchi. So the mother tongue is conserved. She continues to speak to the children in Korta. In this case, no, but whatever. There is a connection between that the burden of linguistic transmission often falls on the female members, female caregivers in the family, right? The males often move away, right? And the males often migrate for livelihood to other locations. So very often the males don't pass on the language. They themselves become semi-speakers after a few decades. But the female members of the community continue to retain a larger role in transmission. Also related to rituals and other practices, social practices. No? Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So, as a linguist, give us some philosophical mooring about this violence in the modern world and violence in languages. I mean, things are spiraling pretty fast, and
So
there
there are
is.
two perspectives on this. So if you believe what Steven Pinker has been saying in his book The Better Angels of Our Nature, where he argues that we are in fact living in the uh, most peaceful epoch of human history, that per capita violence of at various scales, from individual domestic violence to genocide, compared to 500, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and prehistory, what we know from prehistory. His argument is that we have in fact brought it down, and that there is a consensus towards a more peaceful world. Open a news site and it doesn't seem so. That's true. Completely agree, right? And he has been severely criticized for this. I am not an expert in that area, so I don't know enough to. But if that argument is true, if that argument that he makes is true, then it looks like there is a possibility that in the last 200-300 years, we have in fact evolved a modus vivendi, a way of living together, uh, which has in fact mitigated the worst kinds of violence. Once again, the periodic episodes of genocide does not seem to indicate that, does not seem to, but his argument is from a deep historical perspective. So he seems to say that. The other perspective is one that Robert Sapolsky, the neurobiologist, gives, Sapolsky. Uh, Sapolsky's perspective captured very nicely in his 2015 book, Behave, the neurobiology of human behavior. Behave. He argues that we are another primate in this matter. We are a primate with language, but like other primates, we are a hierarchical species where random violence against members of our own species is completely in keeping with what happens in chimpanzees or uh, um, gorillas. But he argues that among the primates also there is a considerable variation. So bonobos seem to be a far more peaceful species compared to chimpanzees. It is not as if that it is homogeneous. And he makes the further argument that because of our ability to um, think, prefrontal cortex, because of that, we are able to make decisions about behavior which are not alone, which are not determined biologically alone. So he gives us a message of hope as well. Pinker gives it in one way, and Sapolsky in another way. That we are a species that may be biologically prone to hierarchy and violence, and hierarchy comes with violence because how else to maintain the hierarchy, right? Um, but we have devised various mechanisms of mitigating that. My favorite example is the Constitution of India. That it has done a magnificent job of uh, describing who we want to be without using the word religion, without using the word history, right? It's an amazing document of constitutional values which promotes liberty, equality, and fraternity without invoking identity, without invoking blood and soil. So, to me, it seems that there is, if we do cleave to the constitutional values that we have all we the people have agreed to, then it seems like there is a good good chance that we will come out of this phase, come out of this period with uh, with some sense of optimism. So the poet Faiz says, "Dil na umeed to nahi, naakaam hi to hai." The heart is not without hope; it has only not yet succeeded. Dil na umeed to nahi, naakaam hi to hai. लंबी है गम की शाम मगर शाम ही तो है, right? That it is the night of sorrow is long, but it is but a night. So perhaps if we take a longer perspective, it is possible that there are reasons for optimism.
Thank you. It was really wonderful. I wished there could be a lot of people, but unfortunately this much. But I think this was actually interesting. And again, I mean, like it's. I think we should clap for sir again. Once again, it's really good. And it was really nice to talk to you. Would love to know more about Esperanto and other stuff. So I just wanted to ask you, it's like the moment we say violence, is like, so the silent violence is on actually language. I mean, like suppose if I'm from Assam and I learned my language, which is my mother tongue, it's Gwalparia. Parallelly, I see the other language which is very close to my heart again, Assamese. That's where I studied, I imagine things, I write things in Assamese. But my spoken it's like language is only Gwalparia. So I enjoy both the things. But the thing is, when we say the other things like as far as we know that the war and genocide and other stuff is happening, so we see it's like when Second World War and other stuff also these claims on Jews and Nazis and other stuff. The moment that we claim something, so is it only so far? It's like linguistic history and document. Did you see that key? Who is the oppressor who is coming to oppress? So the moment they colonize the area, they also spread the language.
Yeah.
Is it seem to happen? And if that so happens, so is it? Can we argue with the fact that because I'm asking from the conservation perspective again, the moment we see the natural resources are declining, I mean, like, or maybe new words such as like maybe coffee is introduced to Sikkim or maybe Assam, which we never knew. So the moment we actually introduce a word along with the matter, which is the coffee, so we tend to lose our cultural diversity. So for the natural diversity, and so for the crisis comes. And on the other way, perhaps whoever is coming out to colonize the area, it could be I'm taking a fact of a coffee. So which is earning money? I mean, like again, it comes on the forms of a capitalism. So is it something like that that you have observed something like that? Keys that language actually pushes boundary. What we think like okay, just a word which is coming, but it might have some other consequences which we may not. It's like it's like thought of it earlier. Can you just describe a bit about it if that makes sense?
So the linguist Prabal Dasgupta, uh, in a book called India's Auntie Tongue, about English in India, the otherness of English, India's Auntie Tongue, that's the full title, 1980 something, 9 perhaps. So he argues that language is territory, language is real estate. There are gatekeepers, there are people who own it, the people who don't allow others to come in, right? So it's very much, he extends that metaphor, and you can see that happening with big languages, wherever big languages oppress small languages. Big languages claim that territory, the educational territory, the judicial territory, the administrative territory. They say that no, in all these places, our language will prevail. You will have to learn our language in order to do that. So there is a strong argument to be made that language and capital, linguistic capital, is a major source of oppression. How do we undo some of that? Just as we undo other kinds of capitalist uh, capital accumulation, right? You make laws to make sure that there is a fair, equitable distribution of capital, right? Similarly, that there needs to be laws to make sure that children are entitled to education in their mother tongue, that they don't have to first struggle with Hindi. The Bhojpuri child does not have to struggle with Hindi in order to get schooling, right? It is for the state to do that, and this is a political battle. So, as far as we know, the most or the only effective non-violent way of social change is politics. It does revolution is a violent method, right? So social transformation, if we want the constitutional ideals of equality to be widespread, what else can we do than make sure that these groups are empowered to ask, to demand that we want education in our language. Please provide the same quality of education in our language that you provide to children going to these schools or that school or the other school, right? So empowering them, and this is not a linguistic idea alone. Political empowerment comes from so many, as Sir was saying, it comes from so many resources being part of that group, right? From Aadhaar cards to land rights uh, to voting rights, right? To solidarity. So those are political. So mobilizing people, mobilizing groups, and getting them to become so that they can make choices. Right now, they don't have choices. They're a voiceless group, which is being buffeted in whichever way that the mainstream wants. So in that sense, I think politics is the only answer. Democratic politics, I mean, yeah, not revolutionary politics.
In that sense, I think this now I'm like what Pallavi is also working is called like place-based education. So perhaps we tend to focus on those things that every child or every place that has their own. I mean, like in terms of environmental, it's like science and studies. So we are trying to, I think, develop a model called place-based education. So I think Pallavi might know better than that, but I think which talks about this kind of things that how we can learn which is there already.
Mm.
Something like that, I guess.
Play-based, did you say?
Place-based education.
Place-based.
I think you can,
Okay, I'll need
yeah,
to have a
yeah,
longer conversation about
yeah.
that. But yeah, thank you.
But yeah, I think I got the answer. It was really good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.